All right, assalamu alaikum everybody. Inshallah, you guys are all doing well. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. First and foremost, I would like to thank Brother Ali over here for coming and joining us today. Inshallah, I know he has a really busy schedule, but he has made some time for us and helped us answer some questions and give us some knowledge, inshallah. Very quickly, I'm just going to let Brother Ali introduce himself, and we'll get started with our questions.
All right, assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Glad to be back. So I was a Tron 2010 grad from Waterloo, and as I walked in through the MC buildings, the nightmares started coming back. I made my duas and headed straight to the prayer room. So happy to be here, safe from the external worlds of midterms and exams. And inshallah, today we'll be talking about Zuhd. What is asceticism? What does it mean to be attached to the dunya? Right? These concepts, inshallah. And there seems to be a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings about this topic. So it'll be a really interesting journey just going through our misconceptions and arriving at kind of like the conclusion, inshallah.
MashaAllah. So, fellow Tron here. I might have to get my resume checked by you later on. But, okay. So, our topic for today is the Zuhd of a Muslim. And so, I guess it's only natural to ask first, what is Zuhd exactly? Is it something that's defined in Quran or Sunnah, or what is it?
Yeah. So, Zuhd, it's interesting. It appears in Surah Yusuf. So, what happens is Yusuf alayhi salam is thrown in the well, and his brothers were basically jealous that Yaqub alayhi salam was giving too much attention and love to Yusuf alayhi salam. And it was only fair because he was really, like living up to that model son. So the other brothers were getting jealous and they wanted to get rid of him. And so they throw him in a well. And what happens is a caravan passes by as planned. And they come and they basically take Yusuf alayhi salam, right, with them, but there's a couple of different tafasir of that verse, and the verse is that basically وَشَرَوْهُ بِثَمَنٍ بَخْسٍ دَرَاهِمَ مَعْدُودَةٍ وَكَانُوا فِيهِ مِنَ الزَّاهِدِينَ, and they sold him at a mere measly sum, right? And they were in that trade from those who were zahid, right? So they were basically content with little in that trade of selling Yusuf alayhi salam. So that's where the word appears in the Quran. So we get this sense of that, okay, you're content with little. They didn't ask for a lot of money because they just wanted to get rid of Yusuf alayhi salam, right? And some say it was the brothers who were selling him because, like they said, oh yeah, this is our slave, he ran away, we don't want him anymore, we'll just sell him for a little bit, right? The other tafsir is that, no, the people who, were taking it from the caravan, they sold him at a measly price because they were afraid that they'll get caught with this person that they're trying to sell as a slave. So before they get caught, they quickly wanted to get rid of him. And so that's why they were content with a little bit of money, right? Now, the term also appears in a hadith. So for example, izhad fi dunya yuhibbuka Allah, have zuhud in dunya and Allah will love you. Wazhad fi ma inda nas yuhibbuka an-nas, and be content, or don't be clingy or needy in front of people, and people will love you, right? And then we find that the Salaf actually wrote books on this topic. So they would have Kitab al-Zuhd, by many of the scholars of Islam. They would dedicate a special book about asceticism, right? So this term and how it appears, a little bit about that.
Any questions? All right, so I know you mentioned about the ayah, about the caravan, the brothers selling off Yusuf, and وَكَانُوا فِيهِ مِنَ الزَّاهِدِينَ. So, and I know zahidin is like one of the Arabic forms of the word zahd to know like people, I guess. So, can you give us some examples of the zahidin, so people who have lit with zuhd beforehand?
Right. So zuhd, I mean, that's going to be the topic of today, inshallah, right? Like, what does it really mean? But if you look at the surface meaning of just being content with little, not really being attached with the value of something, right? Like that's kind of like the meaning. So if we take this meaning as is, then we might see that, okay, someone who is not going after the glitters of the world, right? Like they live in a medium house, they have a medium car. They're not, running after the glitters of the dunya, right? And they might be focused more on, like maybe like studying, charity work or things of that nature. It's like, so you can have an image of maybe that's what zuhud is, right? But what's interesting, and as we'll get to, is that's part of a misconception, right? Because if you look at the lives of the prophets and of the Sahaba and of the Salaf, we find that many of them were actually millionaires. They were rich people. They had many of the blessings that they enjoyed. Yet they were, of course, the real zahideen, right? Like the real people who practice asceticism.
All right, mashallah. So from your experience, where would you say zuhd begins in a person's life? Like, is it something that comes from the heart, or is it something that like gets built upon through actions, or like where does it come from exactly, and how can we implement it in our lives?
Yeah, subhanAllah. So zuhud, I think more than anything, it's a mindset, right? And one of the tricks of shaitan is that he would paint this picture of being a zahid, is that, okay, you have to have like no desires, no attachment to the dunya, you have to be like 100% focused on the akhirah. Every minute of the day you're living, for the akhirah. And when you're not able to achieve that, then he will come and say, well, like you're failing at it, right? And he might make you like deprive of the halal things that Allah has made halal for us. And because of that, not giving yourself enough self-care, not taking care of your body, not taking care of your finances, what will happen is, you will actually start falling into haram or other ways that body wants to then recuperate, right? Like to stay alive. And that's when shaitan will keep coming back. Well, look, you're so bad, right? So he will use that as a spiral to dig you further into, misguidance. And he will say that zuhud is a station, right? It's something of your character almost. It's something of that takes like years of practice to get there, right? However, zuhud actually is not as difficult as shaitan wants us to believe. Zuhud is, we can walk out today, right, from the halaqah, and we could become zahid. Because it's actually a mindset shift, right? It has very little to do with our possessions or, it's like what we're doing in life. It all begins with the mindset change. So that's where I would say it actually begins in your heart or in your mind. And sometimes it's actually really hard to even tell who is a zahid and who is not from the appearances. And I'll give you an example. So there's a person who's making tawaf around the Kaaba, okay, in Mecca. And he's thinking about, he's planning and he's worried about his business. He's like, okay, am I going to make profit or not? Or he's thinking about his trade, right, the whole time. There's another person at the gate of the masjid who's selling dates, okay? But he's constantly in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So on the looks of it, it might look like, oh, the person doing the tawaf is the zahid. And the person selling the dates is the person involved in the dunya. But it could be the opposite, because it's not really about behavior, it's about mindset.
Okay. So then a follow-up question for that. How does someone try to shift towards their mindset of being like a zahid without going too extreme or too disconnected? Because a guy might take this as like, okay, now I had to go to the masjid 24 hours a day, and another guy might be like, okay, as long as I just think about it a little bit every day, I could be considered a zahid. So like, where's the balance?
Yeah, subhanAllah. I think that's really the part that shaitan really likes to play with, because it gets confusing, right? It's like at one end we're told that like dunya is bad, right? وَمَا مَتَاعُ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا غُرُورٌ, right? It's like dunya is all deception. Whoever wants the dunya, they'll have nothing in the akhirah. We're told that, it's like حُبُّ الدُّنْيا وَكَرَاهِيَةُ الْمَوْتِ. That's the disease of the ummah, is that when you start loving the dunya and hating death, that's when you become weak. And there's a lot of like this negative association with dunya. So what happens naturally is, well, shaitan will come, you know what, I think we're supposed to leave the dunya. Because if you have dunya, then you have all these negative associations with dunya. You'll have nothing in the akhirah, you'll be deceived, right? So all these things come into our minds. So the first attack is, well, actually just leave the dunya, And what does that mean? Like, don't put your heart into studying. Don't work to make money. Like, don't have relationships, right? Don't have a family. So you're leaving all these things because this is dunya, and you're supposed to focus on the akhirah, right? So you leave all these things. However, this is the same trick that actually appeared at the time of the Sahaba as well. So there were 3 companions who went to the Prophet ﷺ, and they knocked his door. He wasn't home, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but his wife opened the door, and they asked, it's like, what is his worship like? What does he do? And she told them, how he worships, he sleeps, he eats, he fasts. And they thought, well, this isn't a lot. We thought, there would be a lot more you have to do to be saved for the akhirah. So they said, well, he must be the prophet. That's why he doesn't have to do that much. But we are very sinful. So one of them said, you know what? For the rest of my life, I'm going to fast every single day. I'm never going to have lunch. Okay? Every single day I'm going to fast. The other person said, I'm never going to sleep at night all my life. I'm going to be up for tahajjud all night, all the nights in my life. The third Sahabi said, I'm never going to marry because that's a distraction. I'm going to leave the dunya. I'm going to focus on the akhirah. And so they left. When Rasulullah ﷺ came back, he heard about it and he actually got angry. He called them back. And he said, I marry, I fast, but there's also days when I eat. I don't fast every single day. And for the night prayer, I pray and I also sleep. I don't pray all night. وَإِنِّي لَأَخْشَاكُمْ لِلَّهِ وَأَتْقَاكُمْ لَهُ. And I am the most fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And what he's telling them in an indirect way is that if you really want to be the most fearful of Allah and the closest to Allah, the path to that is not leaving the dunya, right? It's actually to have that balance. So this is where we learn that, okay, that first conception of zuhd, leaving the dunya, can't be right. Because Rasulullah is actually telling them that, I am the most close to Allah and this is what I do. I don't leave the dunya. I marry, I eat, I sleep, but I also worship. So is there a question?
Yeah, sure. When you say balancing, people might seem like balancing the dunya and the akhirah might mean, okay, I have work, but I have salah, 2 different things. But people might not see it visually as, I could work and still get myself attached to the dunya through the work I'm doing professionally. So like, how would you clarify something like that to people? How would you encourage people to have that mindset of every single activity you're carrying out can be a form of you attaching yourself to the akhirah? I'll say people like generally find practices or Islamic traditional practices as akhirah based fully, or anything else like outside that was like being nice or like working to like provide for families, just being doing it. So like, what's your clarity on that?
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? So let's get to that. So the brother's talking about attachment to the dunya, like having focus at work, enjoying the work, but using that as an intention that I'm doing this to provide for my family, and attaching that bigger goal to the akhirah, right? But so we can get to that because that's kind of like an advanced stage, right? So the first stage of shaitan telling us was even in being involved in dunya is going against zuhd. But we just learned that no, it's not, right? Like leaving the dunya is actually not zuhd. In fact, it is the opposite. Because in the same hadith, Rasulullah said, فَمَنْ رَغِبَ عَنْ سُنَّتِي فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي. And whoever turns away from my paths of this, using the dunya and worshipping, then he is not from us. So what's really interesting is that Buddhism has this concept that all suffering comes from attachments. All suffering comes from having desires of the dunya, right? And that's what it actually promotes, is that you have to cut off all desires and all attachments to the dunya to live, in the nirvana, in that peaceful state. And the Rasulullah is saying is that if you turn away from my path of leaving the dunya, right, of detaching from the dunya completely, then you're not on my path, because then you're closer to being a Buddhist, right? So that's the first level. Now the second part is Now, what about, okay, so we're not leaving the dunya, but what if we enjoy the dunya? Is that going against zuhd, right? So for example, it's like, okay, well, you go to a restaurant, you have options. You can get something you enjoy, or you can get something just bland to get by. So you're still eating, you're still involving yourself in the dunya, but you're not enjoying the dunya, right? Because enjoying the dunya might mean, oh, now I'm like too attached to the dunya, right? Is that so? And we find that, interestingly, that Rasulullah ﷺ actually used to love honey, right? And there was an incident that happened where he actually forbade honey on himself. He said, you know what, after this, I'm not going to have honey, okay? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually revealed a verse in the Quran saying that, Ya ayyuha rasulu, lima tuharrimu ma ahalla Allahu laka tabtaghi mardata azwajik, right? He said, why are you making haram what Allah has made halal? So it was something that he enjoyed, but when he was making it haram, Allah said, don't make it haram, right? So you're actually allowed to enjoy the dunya as well. We find other verses, قُلْ مَنْ حَرَّمَ زِينَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي أَخْرَجَ لِعِبَادِهِ وَالطَّيِّبَاتِ مِنَ الرِّزْقِ. Say, who has made haram the beauty that Allah has prepared and the طيبات from the rizq, the good things of the rizq. قُلْ هِيَ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. Say, these are for the believers in the life of the dunya. Right? So we're actually supposed to enjoy them. So enjoyment is again not against zuhud as well. And for example, we're also told that having relationships with your spouse is actually sadaqah. So even an enjoyment that one might consider, oh, this is too much dunya, it actually could become sadaqah, right? So that's the second level. Is that okay? So if leaving the dunya is not zuhud, so we're supposed to engage in the dunya, and then when the blessings come and we enjoy them, that's also not against zuhud, because we're told الطاعم الشاكر بمنزلة الصائم الصابر. Is the person who eats and is grateful is at the same level as a person who is fasting and he's patient, right? So again, like enjoying and being grateful to the blessings of Allah actually does not go against the zuhud as well. And now let's come to the third point, which was what the brother was mentioning. Okay, what about loving the dunya, right? Because that now seems like the problem. Because the term we're told, حب الدنيا, right? Like loving the dunya is the problem. So let's break this down. Like what is dunya? Can anyone explain? Like what is dunya? Any definitions? Yeah. Travel. Okay. Yeah. So that's an analogy, right? But like what are the things that are elements of the dunya? You can say that we interact with in the dunya. Like what is dunya for you? Yeah. A test, sure, but that's still an analogy, right? Like I'm thinking about, okay, like when you do something in your day, what do you interact with you call dunya? Yeah. Family, job, good, right? So things that we interact with, like, okay, if I'm with the family, that's dunya. If I'm at the masjid, that's akhirah, right? If I'm making money, that's dunya, right? So now there's an interesting verse which summarizes many of them. زُيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ حُبُّ الشَّهَوَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ وَالْبَنِينَ وَالْقَنَاطِيرِ الْمُقَنطَرَةِ مِنَ الذَّهَبِ وَالْفِضَّةِ وَالْخَيْلِ الْمُسَوَّمَةِ وَالْأَنْعَامِ وَالْحَرْثِ ذَلِكَ مَتَاعُ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. Right? So Allah is saying is that for mankind, things have been beautified. And what are these things? They are the women, or like the spouse, kids, wealth, heaps of gold and silver, right? Rides, cars, for example. The verse mentions horses, camels, and cattle, right? So kind of like camels and cattle used to be the investments of the time. So money, investments, rides, family. Another verse mentions وَمَسَاكِنَ تَرْضَوْنَهَا, right? And houses that you love to live in. So this is dunya. That's what dunya is, right? So now we're told, okay, we're not supposed to leave these things. We're not supposed to leave the dunya. And we can also enjoy these things, right? That also doesn't go against the zuhud. But loving them might be the problem, right? Now let's take a look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ. What does he say? He says, حُبِّبَ إِلَيَّ مِن دُنْيَاكُمْ النِّسَاءُ وَالطِّيبُ, right? what has been made beloved to me from your dunya is women and perfumes. So again, we find that Rasulullah actually himself is saying he has love of the women and perfumes. Okay, we find the muttaqeen making dua in the Quran. رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. Oh Allah, bless us with wives and children that are beautiful, that give us, the pleasure to look at, and make us leaders of muttaqeen. So we're like, okay, they're quite attached to the dunya of family. We find Rasulullah's son Ibrahim, when he passes away, Rasulullah actually he gets sad, he cries, right? He says, وَإِنَّ لِفَرَاقِكَ لَمَحْزُونُونَ, that we're sad, that you left us. And he's crying so much, it's like that you realize that he must have been attached. There's no way that you lose something that you didn't care about, you wouldn't cry as much, right? Like, so he was definitely attached. We find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describing wealth, وَإِنَّهُ لِحُبِّ الْخَيْرِ لَشَدِيدٌ. The nature of mankind is that for the love of money, he is very severe, right? We all have this love of wealth in us. So again, that's by design. So if that goes against zuhd, if that goes against asceticism, then that's kind of like it's going against our nature, right? And we can go on and on about all the other things as well, right? It's like we know of the prophets making dua for these things. Zakaria alayhi salam making dua for a child. Ayub alayhi salam making dua for his health. Sulaiman alayhi salam making dua for a kingdom that no one will have after him. Right? Rabbi habli mulka la yanbaghi li ahadin min ba'di. Oh Allah, give me a kingdom so big and so massive that no other king in the world will ever have after me. That's a prophet of Allah making this dua, right? So we know that asking for these things, loving these things, being attached to these things cannot be against zuhd, because could we blame that Sulaiman alayhi salam was not a zahid? We can't, right? So now the question comes back to, then what is zuhd? Because if we're supposed to live in the dunya, we can even enjoy it, we can even love it, then what is all this talk about, zuhd, about detaching from the dunya and focusing on the akhirah? And if we get too much into dunya, then you get nothing in the akhirah, because there are clear verses, right? من كان يريد الحياة الدنيا وزينتها نوفي إليهم أعمالهم فيها وهم فيها لا يبخسون, right? People who want the beauty of this world, what will happen? They will have nothing in the akhirah. من كان يريد حرث الدنيا نؤته منها وما له في الآخرة من نصيب. Whoever wants the reward of the dunya, we will give him from it, but he will have nothing in the akhirah. So that's where the question appears, that, okay, well, on the one hand, we're told that we can have all of dunya, but on the other hand, if this is what we want, then we get nothing in the akhirah. So this is where the problem comes. It's like, how do we solve this? But we can continue, inshallah, if you have another question.
No, please.
Yeah, okay. So what we find is, at the time of Hajj, right? It's in Surah Baqarah, the passage about Hajj. People are making dua. فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَقُولُ رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا وَمَا لَهُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنْ خَلَاقٍ. And there, from the people who are making Hajj, some of them are making dua, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيا, oh Allah, give us in the dunya. وَمَا لَهُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنْ خَلَاقٍ. And he will have nothing in the akhirah. And this is a person making Hajj. Okay, so imagine a Haji, he's making dua, Ya Allah, give me in the dunya. And Allah is saying he will have nothing in the akhirah. Okay, and then the next verse, وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَقُولُ رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. And there's another person who's making the dua, Ya Allah, give me the good in the dunya and good in the akhirah, and protect me from the fire. أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ نَصِيبٌ مِّمَّا كَسَبُوا. These are the people who will have a portion of what they were making efforts for. So we start to see some sign, okay, so maybe what we're told about is that if we only ask for dunya, then that's a problem. Then we get nothing in the akhirah. But if we're asking for dunya and akhirah, then I think we're okay, right? Because this second dua is actually the most popular dua, right? And Allah is promoting it. So we're like, okay, so there must be some answer here. But let's go back to the hubb of dunya, the love of the dunya, okay? Can anyone think of a verse which talks about loving the dunya is bad, or being attached to the dunya is bad, even if it's a translation? Yeah.
There's a hadith, okay?
Sure.
There's a hadith in Sunan, I think, An-Nasai,
Mhm.
Kitab Zuhd. Everything in this dunya is cursed except for knowledge, the knowledge seeker, and I forgot the last one. Those three things.
Right.
The one who remembers Allah, anything conducive to it. That's the last one.
Right. الدنيا ملعونة ملعون ما فيها إلا ذكر الله وعالم أو متعلم. Right. Dunya is cursed and everything in it is cursed. Right. So we know that, okay, so dunya is cursed, everything in it is cursed, except, so the exception is how do you make dunya not cursed? If you're remembering Allah or you're learning or teaching, right? So we're like, okay, so, but like the question still remains, like being attached to the dunya or loving the dunya. Is there a verse that talks about like loving the dunya is bad or being attached to the dunya is bad? Because we know as a concept, we all talk about love of the dunya is bad, but what's the evidence for it, right? Yeah.
It's this is one of the verses or passage of verse in Surah Al-Kahf,
Uh-huh.
where it talks about, I can recall, وَكَانُوا يَحْسَبُونَ أَنَّهُمْ يَعْمَلُونَ صُنْعًا. Like they were thinking that they were doing good. It's towards the end of, it's like, who are the people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes, who are the people who have lost it?
Uh-huh.
The ones who their sa'i was in the hayat dunya and they thought that they were doing good.
Yes, but that's more of a, like they were thinking that they're doing good, but their deed was not acceptable, right? So it's not directly about like loving the dunya or not, because they might be doing something good, thinking they're doing it for the akhirah. But I'm looking for a proof that says that loving the dunya is bad. Yeah. Which one, sorry? Al-Hakum al-Takathur. Very good, right? Al-Hakum al-Takathur, right? The race towards increasing your wealth or increasing your dunya has destroyed you. Good. So what we learn is that there's an element of, okay, when we're racing towards increasing our dunya, that could destroy us, right? That's a really good one. But anything else about like just being attached to the dunya itself? Yeah.
There's a hadith again that I remember. It's one of the ones where the Prophet talks about that the Muslims will be as big as the foam of the sea, but will be weak and will be destroyed.
Yes.
And they ask why, and one of the reasons why the Prophet says that because we love the dunya, not the akhirah.
Yeah, so the hadith is حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا وَكَرَاهِيَةُ الْمَوْتِ. That's the symptom, right? Like when you love the dunya and you hate the death. So that's a package. When you love dunya and you hate and you hate dying, right? So it's still not like very clearly about only loving the dunya, right? It has that added element of loving the dunya and hating death. But if someone loves the dunya and he loves to die, I think this wouldn't apply, right? That's my point. Anything else?
There's another hadith, well, I'm paraphrasing it. Whoever their concern was the dunya,
Mm-hmm.
Allah, like, He takes it away from him, but whoever's concern was the akhirah, Allah makes the dunya and the akhirah for him.
Exactly, right? And that actually appears in a lot of verses as well. Man kana yuridu hayat ad-dunya, right? So whoever makes his goal the dunya, right? And I think that's where the definition is emerging, right? Is that, okay, if you're racing towards making the dunya your goal, if you're trying to increase your dunya and fighting over it, right? That seems to be the problem. But just loving the dunya, just if you love a subject, if you love a degree in engineering, if you love a special craft, a hobby, if you love, spending time with your family, it seems like there's nothing that really says that that's wrong. Okay? What's really interesting is that if you look at all the verses that talk about love of the dunya, they're actually all talking about prioritization. Okay, so we find, for example, in Surah Tawbah, قُلْ إِنْ كَانَ آبَاؤُكُمْ وَأَبْنَاؤُكُمْ, like this whole list of items is that if your family or your wealth or your houses become what? أَحَبَّ إِلَيْكُمْ مِنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَجِهَادٍ فِي سَبِيلِهِ. Right? If they become more beloved to you than Allah and His Messenger and struggle in His cause, then what happens? Then wait until the punishment of Allah comes. So we find that there's a prioritization problem, right? Loving the dunya in itself, Allah is not saying explicitly that it's wrong. He's saying, but if you love Allah, if you love it more than Allah, then that's a problem, right? We find الَّذِينَ يَسْتَحِبُّونَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا عَلَى الْآخِرَةِ. Those who love the dunya more than the akhirah, above the akhirah, right? They are in trouble. الَّذِينَ يَشْرُونَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا بِالْآخِرَةِ. Those who sold the akhirah for the dunya, they're in trouble, right? We find وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. Those who believe, they have more love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So they're going to have love for other things, but their most love is for Allah. So I think that's really where it starts to make sense then. Okay, so we can have the dunya, we can enjoy the dunya, we can even love the dunya and be attached to it, right? But we cannot love it and be attached to it more than the akhirah. So that's where the definition really starts to emerge. Okay, what is zuhd? Zuhd is basically just realizing that, okay, if this life, we're going to live maybe 100 years max, right? And the next life is like an infinite life. Then it would be stupid for us to like focus more of our efforts on such a finite, limited life and not worry about the infinite life, right? And it just basically makes logical sense that if we're putting more of our effort towards the akhirah, right, then that is what zuhd would be. And at this point, like, I would also like to take some analogies, right? So, like, what is dunya? So, the way I like to think of it is, if we go back to the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, where the word zahidin is mentioned, right? So what it looks like is that the caravan is buying this slave, Yusuf alayhi salam, from these brothers, right? And to an outsider, it might look like a transaction is happening. They're selling a slave, they're getting some payment, and it's a transaction, right? But if you think about the mindset of the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam, that's least of their concerns. They don't even care about getting the money, right? They have a goal, they have a mission, and their mission is to get rid of Yusuf alayhi salam, right? So they don't even care about how much money they're making, and that's why they're zahideen, right? So if you take the same analogy and apply it to dunya, imagine you are in an interview, okay? You're in an interview where it's kind of like a behavioral interview where they put a bunch of students into a room. There's a camera that's watching how the students are doing, okay? And there's a Monopoly board game. And you're asked to play for a couple hours, okay? And the camera is watching. Now, what happens is people who don't know of what's going on, they might get into the game too much. And they're like, oh no, I have to make money, I have to buy this property, and they're kind of like, they're getting angry, and they're like maybe stealing money from this person, that person. They're trying to build their empire, they're trying to win the game, right? That becomes their goal. But the person who knows that, okay, well, we're being watched. The goal here is not to win Monopoly. The goal here is to get the job, right? So they might even lose out on the game, but they're always smiling, they're keeping their composure, they're playing by the rules because they know that's more important than winning this Monopoly game, right? And that is, to an outsider who might look into the room, it might look like these people are playing Monopoly. That's what's happening, right? But to the believer, he knows that actually I have a bigger goal here. I'm just being tested. I want to get the job, right? I don't care about this Monopoly money. I want to make the real money, right? So he is playing by the rules. He's okay to lose, but he can't lose his temper, right? And his bigger goal in his mind, that's what makes him a zahid. Because he doesn't care when he has to pay extra rent. He happily pays it, right? Because he knows this is not the point of what we're doing. Just as the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam, when they were selling him, they were happy with little coins. Because, that's not the point. The point is to get rid of Yusuf alayhi salam, right? And that's what this life is all about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put the love of the dunya in our hearts, has made it beautiful for us. زُيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ, right? Dunya has been made beautiful for us. وَإِنَّهُ لِحُبِّ الْخَيْرِ لَشَدِيدٌ, and man will ever be, like very strong in the love of the wealth. And all these things are put in us. Why? Because imagine in that interview room, if you put students who don't even want to play Monopoly, who don't even want to win, right? Then you can't really test them. So you have to put a test where there's some motivation for them to win. They want to win, right? And that's what makes it a real test. Because they're trying to win, but at the same time they're also trying to win the interview, right? And the more we are actually involved in the dunya, the more there's avenues for us to prove our zuhd, right? Because imagine someone says that, you know what, okay, I'm not even going to go to college, I'm not even going to buy a house, I'm not going to have a family, okay? So basically what he's saying is that I'm not going to play Monopoly, right? Now, it's hard for the interviewer to know how good this person is. Like, how does he behave under stress? If he has a mission to achieve, how is he going to function? There's not enough data, right, for the interviewer to assess that person. And likewise, if we step out of the natural life that Allah has put us in, then we can't really get good deeds. Because the good deeds are going to come when you really want to succeed. You want to get that job. You want to marry that person. You want to have a car. You want to have a house, right? You have those motivations. But you want to do it the halal way, even if it takes longer. That's really how you're proving, you're showing that you're worthy of Jannah, right? So that's a really interesting way of looking at zuhd, is that it's not really about your possessions. Like Ali radiallahu anh said, zuhd is not about how much dunya you hold, right? But it's about how much of the dunya holds you, right? Because there's a really interesting hadith, is that ta'isa abdul dinar wa abdul dirham wa abdul khamisa, is that may the person who is enslaved to the dollar and better clothes be destroyed. If he is given these things, he's happy. But if these things are taken away, he gets angry, right? Because that's his goal. He's too involved in monopoly that if he's not making money, he gets angry, right? And then the hadith continues, is that the person who succeeds is the one that he doesn't care where he is put, So the analogy given is of a battle. So whether he's put on the front line, in the back line, as a leader, as a soldier, whatever rank he's put in, he's happy, right? So basically, like whatever we get in the dunya, we're happy because we're like, it's like the dunya is just a monopoly. It doesn't matter where we are. What matters is, am I succeeding in my goal? Am I showing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I can be within the boundaries of halal no matter what the circumstances, right? Dr. Israr Ahmed, I really love this analogy he gives about the dunya. He's like, dunya is basically like a stage show, okay? And we're all actors. And we're given like different roles. So someone is a king, someone is a servant, someone is this, someone is that. But it's just a show, right? When the show ends, everyone is at the same level, right? And that's what dunya is. Like some people are like the Elon Musks, and other people are like, OSAP loan bearers. and there's like, this is just like a show, right? So where you're put in the play doesn't really matter that much, because sometimes the servant in the show can get the award for better acting than the king. Because what you're being judged on is not the status, but how well you perform in that role, right? And that reframing is really what zuhd is. Because you find that many of the Sahaba, right, they were millionaires. They had a lot of wealth, they had everything. But they knew how to prioritize it. They knew that this is just monopoly, right? What really matters is, am I, able to sacrifice this for Allah if needed? Am I able to prioritize those things better? Yeah. Okay.
So one way you described it was being basically happy or content with what you have or where you're at, if I understood correctly. So then how do you balance that out with actually having goals that, sure, you can relate to being for both the dunya and the hereafter,
But how do you kind of balance that along with the idea of being content with where you are? And essentially being content with where you are versus setting goals. And whether those goals are for the dunya or the hereafter. Or a mix of both.
Yeah. So,
if you don't mind, also add on to the question. What if it's like your parents that like want you to become like an engineer, but you're content being like,
A cashier.
sure.
all right. Good questions. So, first one is an interesting one. I think Sheikh Jasir Qadi has a whole khutbah on that topic. Like, how do you balance between contentment and setting goals, right? But basically, I think contentment is about shukr. Contentment is about looking at your state and thanking Allah for what He has given you, right? If you're not thankful to Allah, then that's really when you're not content, right? So I think contentment has more to do with the past, like what has happened to you in your life up to now. So kind of like you're looking at the past and you're looking at where you're at today, and you're happy with that. You're content with Allah's decree. You're happy with where you're at in life. That's contentment, right? And goal setting is about the future. So yes, you're content with where you are today, but it doesn't mean that that's how it has to be tomorrow, right? So contentment is about the past, and goal setting is about the future. So you can still have higher goals. And in fact, we're actually told, interestingly, so again, like tying it back to the topic of zuhd, a person might think that, oh, you know what, like we're supposed to be status quo. We're supposed to just like get into the mediocre zone and just stick it out until we die, right? But that's not true, because we find the hadith where Rasulullah ﷺ is teaching us, al-mu'minu al-qawiyyu khayrun wa ahabbu ila Allahi min al-mu'min al-da'if wa fi kullin khayr. Ihris ala ma yanfa'uk wasta'in billahi wa la ta'jiz. He's saying that a strong believer is better and more beloved to Allah than a weak believer. Yet there's good in both of them. So hasten towards what will benefit you. Ihris, like be greedy to have more good in your life. And ask Allah to bless you more. وَلَا تَعْجِزْ, and don't be lazy. Right? Like it's like a motivational speech. Like go out and get more of the dunya. Right? In fact, like some of the scholars say that al-mu'min al-qawi, what does it mean? Like a stronger believer, like stronger in their iman. But actually, if you think about it, like if it was stronger in iman, then it would be that a believer who is stronger in iman is better than a believer who is weaker in iman, which makes sense. But then the next phrase is وَفِي كُلٍّ خَيْرٍ, but there's good in both of them, right? That phrase is hard to interpret because, okay, well, we can't really say that someone who has weak iman has good in him. Because if he's weak in iman, he's going to be falling into sins, he's going to be doing... So it's harder to make that argument. But it's easier to make that argument to understand this. If we're saying that they're both mu'min, so they both have iman, but the qawi believer is stronger in dunya, stronger in his finances, in his health, in his, in everything else in life, yes, right? So again, I think going back to that point of cashier versus engineer, right? Okay, so this is an interesting one. What do you guys think? Do you think the cashier is a zahid and the engineer is not? Yeah.
I think he should try to make more of an effort to be the best version of himself. But if the best version of himself is a cashier, then it's just the dunya.
Okay. Good answer, yeah.
I would think maybe it's not as related to like whether they're okay with being a cashier or not. It's like the reason why.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, they might think like, oh, I'm happy as a cashier because, like they're grateful, or they feel like, like they've been given a lot and they're able to make ends meet and everything. Versus maybe if they're just like unmotivated, kind of like the thing you were saying before, where if someone doesn't care about the game, then you can't really test them in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of goes back to the mindset and their intentions and why they're okay with where they are and why they're going after the goals that they want to go after.
Right. Do you have something to add?
It might be the parents of the individual see like a talent in them that the child themselves don't realize. the child might feel like, alhamdulillah, I'm able to go to roasters with guys, nothing more to ask about. But like the parents is like, dude, you're gonna have a family, get a life straight. It might be like advice from the parents based on life experiences.
Yeah, good point. So I think like there's an element of doing what you're good at or what your passion is, right? So if you remove that part, so for example, maybe like engineering is not his passion, right? Maybe he wants to be, I don't know, like an artist or something else, right? A machine learning engineer, whatever. That's still an engineer. So, so if you remove that part, and if you just say like, okay, maybe both of these professions are within his capability, within his passion, right? But he's settling for the lower one, then it's you're right. Like it's about talking sense into him. Like, why are you doing this, right? Like, because if you're going for a position that will not give you more opportunity, then how will you make a bigger impact? How will you give more charity? How will you build more sadaqah jariyah? How will you raise a family, right? Like, so all these things are good things to talk about to bring some sense into him, right? And you're right that, okay, like he might think that, oh, maybe this is zuhd, is that a lot of times like this is another kind of like trick of shaitan, or like a consoling way that we use zuhd, is that after you fail an exam, oh, this is dunya, you know, we're not supposed to we're not supposed to be good at this anyways. No, that's not how it works, right? We put in our full effort, because if you look at the Sahaba, you know, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, for example, was the top merchant in Mecca, right? Like these people were top in their fields. Like Khalid bin Walid was like the top general, right? Like, so these people were top in their fields, and they didn't just say, oh, you know what, I don't feel like it today, I'm not gonna go, and you know, maybe this is dunya, right? No, like I think that is kind of an interesting attack from the shaitan, where he wants to push people who are disbelievers into the dunya to make them successful, so that they can take charge of the dunya, right? Whereas the believers, he wants to push them out. So, oh, this is dunya, you're wasting your time, go read the Quran, go pray tahajjud, right? Yes, we have to go read the Quran and tahajjud, but is that what the Sahaba did? Like if you look at the lives of the Sahaba, were they sitting the whole day reading Quran? Were they, you know, it's like, no, that's not how their lives were. The night was for tahajjud, for Quran, but the day was where they were back into dunya, right? So that's how they strang it together. It's like in the daytime they're back in the dunya, they're back into politics, they're back into battles, they're back into changing the world, right? That's, if you think about what that real goal is, right, of a believer, إِنَّ اللَّهَ اشْتَرَى مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَنفُسَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُمْ بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ يُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ فَيَقْتُلُونَ وَيُقْتَلُونَ. Allah has bought from the believers their lives and their wealth, and He has given for them in exchange the paradise. So what did they sell this for, right? Like, what do they have to do? يُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. They strive and they fight to change the systems, right? And they get killed in the process, right? But they're also able to make a dent. And that is really the goal. كُنْتُمْ خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ. You are the best of ummahs who is brought out for the mankind. تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. Right? You command good and you forbid evil. So that's, how can we do that? Like that is really the goal. Right? Like the goal of being in the monopoly is not really to win the monopoly, but it is to make sure that no one else is cheating in monopoly, right? And that happens when you become the banker, right? Because then you know who's taking how much money from the bank. And for you to get to be the banker, right, you know, maybe you have to work up the ranks to get there. So it's really interesting, like a person might be fully involved in the dunya, but his goal is really to establish Allah's law on earth, and that becomes his zuhd. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm taking other questions, but just a quick question is, some people might have this, it's easy to lie to yourself that I'm doing this for the sake of Allah. For example, I'm going to get a job, buy myself a Tesla, buy myself a house, get married, have 4 kids for the sake of Allah. Easy deception to make, but like, how would you, from an early stage, be like, okay, how do I ensure, because like, people might battle the intentions a lot, or how do I ensure that I'm doing this for my own benefits, but also to benefit myself now and the hereafter? Not just like I'm doing this, but yeah, for the akhirah, that's like a byproduct.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
That's a really good point. So again, I think it comes back to that point of dunya and akhirah and the prioritization, right? So loving the dunya is not bad, right? And in fact, if I introduce another concept, which is really interesting, is the difference between joy and happiness, right? So one is allowed, one is kind of like not allowed, okay? And they seem very similar, right? So what we find is that Qarun, who had a lot of wealth, right? And he's putting this wealth on display, and he has so much wealth that just the keys, right, to his treasure boxes, or like the rooms where all his money was kept, just the keys were put together in a bucket or something, and it would take like 10 people to carry that bucket with the keys, because he had so many keys to all the treasure boxes that even that was hard to carry. So he's like the multi like billionaire whatever of his time, and he's putting this show on display, and he's like jumping up and down with happiness, and maybe some confetti is going up, right? And what happens is Allah actually causes the earth to swallow him, right? And he goes deep into the earth. And the people are telling him, لا تفرح إن الله لا يحب الفرحين, right? Don't have this manic happiness, because Allah does not like this extensive happiness. So you find that, okay, so we're not supposed to have happiness, right? And sometimes you might think that, okay, then any happiness in life is something to be avoided because Allah doesn't like it. But what we find is joy is something that actually is part of the goals, right, that Allah has put on this earth. Is that, why did we get married? لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. So you find that serenity, that peace in your life, that joy, that fulfillment, right? So there's a level of fulfillment that Allah actually wants us to achieve, right? That Allah wants us to have. But there's this level of happiness, right? This extra manic happiness that is not desired. So for example, if we look at like loving your spouse, okay? So there's a healthy attachment to the dunya. You love your spouse, right? You care for them, and it brings about this sukoon, this joy, this fulfillment, right? That is what Allah wants for us. But what He does not want is this unhealthy attachment, this obsession, this going overboard, that you do anything for the spouse, even if it's halal or haram, right? Because that leads to turmoil, and that leads to Romeo and Juliet, right? Where they kill themselves for the other person, only to find out that the other person was alive, and then so that is what Allah is saying. No, your attachment and your happiness, Allah wants us to actually enjoy the real happiness, because that turmoil is not really happiness. It's more of a suffering, right? There's a lot we can say about that, but I think coming back to your point of how do we know, if what we're pursuing in dunya is for our own benefit, or is it really for the akhirah, right? So I think that would be the first distinction that we need to make, is what we're pursuing, is it for joy or is it for happiness, right? Is what we're pursuing, is it for that purpose that Allah built us for, to have a stable life, to have family, to have financial well-being? So another interesting verse is that, do not give your wealth to the foolish people, وَلَا تُؤْتُوا السُّفَهَاءَ أَمْوَالَكُمْ الَّتِي جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ قِيَامًا. Don't give the fools your wealth that Allah has given to you as a means for your establishment. So what it's telling us is that Allah doesn't want you to give all your wealth away. Allah wants you to establish yourself financially. Have a model that you don't have to worry about money all the time, right? Because imagine someone who's always worried about running out of money, finding a job. Of course, he's not going to have time to do da'wah. He's not going to have time to think about the akhirah that much, right? So Allah wants us to have a base level of joy, stability, happiness in dunya. And that's why the du'as are told, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً comes first, right? Ya Allah, give us that hasana in dunya. وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً, and then give us the hasana in the akhirah. Because once you've attained that level of joy in life, you have that stability, now you can focus on the akhirah, right? But I think having that أَلْهَاكُمُ التَّكَاثُرُ verse, right? If you're just chasing more and more and more, that is what is despised. So you shouldn't like have like just unending goals for the dunya, right? You need to have, and everyone's different, right? Everyone's dunya is different. For some people it's wealth, for some people it's relationships, for some people it's property, houses, cars, whatever it is, right? So you know yourself better. So whatever your dunya is, like you need to get to that level of satisfaction, that base joy, that you're stable in life, right? And then you need to focus the rest of it on the akhirah. One more analogy quickly I'll give is of, so Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, he gives the example of the dunya as a camel. He says, imagine the dunya as a camel, and your goal is to get to the Kaaba for Hajj, okay? So if you kill your camel, right, you're not going to get to the Kaaba, right? And that's what the dunya is. Like, if we say, you know what, I'm not going to do anything in dunya, I'm not going to get married, I'm not going to work, I'm going to give up all the wealth that I have, I'm not going to take care of my health, then you're not going to get to Jannah because you don't have the resources, right? So you need to, and if we take that analogy in today's time, imagine a car, okay? So you're given a car from your boss, okay, go and deliver this parcel to such and such a location. So you're driving the car, and he's giving you some money for the gas, right? Now you see a beggar on the street, so you give all the money to the beggar, and now you're running out of gas. Like, oh, I'm not gonna make it, right? So you've actually lost the point of what the mission was, right? So you have to hold money for your gas, so you're not worried about running out of gas, so you can function, right? And that's the level. I think if you take that analogy, is that whatever is needed to keep your car going, right? So it'd be your gas, money for your maintenance, taking care of the car, right? That's kind of like what Allah actually wants us to achieve. That's part of the maqasid al-sharia, right? Like the 5 maqasid al-sharia. All the rules of Islam, they have these 5 goals: to protect your deen, to protect your life, to protect your intellect, to protect your progeny, and to protect, I think, your health. There's one more. So basically, all these things are about the dunya, most of them, right? So Allah wants you to protect these things so that you can actually achieve the goal, right? But let's say if the person is like, okay, you know what? I have the car, my fuel's good, it's maintained, I got the oil change done, but now I wanna, it's like I wanna take it and get the rims, spoofed up, and I want the lights on it, and I want this, and I want that. Like that's really where you start going into that happiness zone, where you have to check yourself, right? Okay, like this is not about the goal that the car wanted to achieve. This is just now you're spending extra, and a bit of it is okay, as long as it doesn't distract you. For example, you had money for the gas, but you used it to buy new lights, right? So it looks great, but now you're not going to make it to the destination.
So keeping all that in mind, how do you explain, like, for example, there's like I believe there's a hadith, and I'm paraphrasing, where Umar radiallahu anhu, he gave half his wealth for the sake of Islam, and then Abu Bakr gave all of his wealth for the sake of Islam. So then how do you explain that in the context of what we're talking about now?
Right.
I do apologize. We are kind of running out of time. So does anybody have any like really quick questions that our brother here could like answer very quickly? And then we'll still get to your question.
Yeah.
We have one more. I don't know if it's quick, but so you mentioned basically having a base level to get to like contentment, right? And everyone's contentment level might be different, right? But whatever your contentment level is, how do you bring that in retrospect with the Sahaba like Abdurrahman ibn Auf, for example, who reached the base level and then he went for more for the sake of Allah, right?
Yeah, really good question. So let me answer this one first. So if you look at that time, I think this was first of all, this was not a normal practice, right? We don't find other incidences where the Sahaba gave all their wealth, and we find like in the Quran like very explicitly, وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ, right? They spend from what we gave them. It doesn't say وَمَا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. They don't give what we gave them. They give from it, right? And then we find that يَسْأَلُونَكَ مَاذَا يُنْفِقُونَ. They ask, what should they spend? قُلِ الْعَفْوَ. Spend what's extra, right? So that's kind of like the general rule, is you're supposed to give after you fulfill the other obligations to yourself, to your family, and then whatever is left, that's what you donate. However, in this incident, there was a dire need for money, right? So therefore, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh actually gives everything that he has. And how he's able to do that is because he's a merchant. He's the top merchant of Mecca, right? So he knows that, okay, yes, he's out, but next month he's going to make it all back, right? So in that sense, he is not cutting himself off from the source. It's kind of like, the salary is going to come in on the first of the month, and you're in like the last week of the month, you're like, okay, let me empty my account. It doesn't mean you're giving up dunya. It just means that, okay, yeah, this month I'm giving it, but I'm going to get it back, right? And if you look at Umar radiallahu anh, actually, the fact that he gave, we talk about the fact that he gave half his wealth, but the fact that he didn't give the other half is also a proof that he knew that that would be wrong, right? We find another hadith where a sahabi is dying, and now, of course, he doesn't need his wealth because he's dying. So he says he wants to give, I think, all of it, right, to a charity or something. And Rasulullah says, no, you can't. He said, okay, maybe half. He said, no, you can't. He said, okay, maybe third. He said, fine, you can give the third, wa thuluth kathir. But even the third is a lot, right? So here, Rasulullah actually telling him, no, you cannot give all of your wealth in charity. Why? Because Islam wants us to protect our finances. The wealth that he has goes to his inheritors, his family, and they need to be supported, right? So there's that concept. Good. Sorry, your question was about?
You mentioned like a base level.
Oh, base level. Right. Right. So I mean, we're talking about wealth here, right? So again, like I think there's a level of there's no stopping the halal, right? So you can have as much halal as you want. For example, Sulaiman alayhi salam is making dua, Ya Allah, give me a kingdom that no one will have after me, right? So he has like jinns and like animals and his armies and everything. So as long as, again, like it's kind of like you're playing Monopoly, right? And you want to have maybe all the properties, right? But as long as it doesn't take away from your composure in the interview and you're still playing by the rules, there's nothing wrong per se, right? The only problem happens is if that starts to take too much time away, that now you don't have time left for the kids, you can't raise them up properly, you don't have time for Quran, for da'wah. That's where the problem is, right? So Abdurrahman bin Auf radiallahu anh, for example, like because he knows like that's his field, that's what he's good at, and that's how he can contribute. That's what he does, and that's what we find with all the Sahaba is that like they knew themselves really well, so they would actually align their passions with their good deeds. Okay, so that's another aspect of Zuhd actually, is that we confuse that, okay, if I'm passionate about something and I'm doing a good deed, then maybe that's not a good deed, because I'm just passionate about it, right? I should do something that I don't enjoy, because that would be the Zuhd, but that's not how the Sahaba operated. Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anh, actually, he wouldn't fast. He wouldn't fast extra outside of Ramadan. And people asked him, like, why don't you fast outside of Ramadan? And he had a weak physical body, but he loved the Quran. So he said that when I fast, I actually can't concentrate. I can't ponder the Quran, and I can't teach it and learn it, like the best way possible. So I don't fast. I just focus on the Quran. So they knew that where their passions lied, and they used them to actually optimize their good deeds. So for example, Abdurrahman bin Auf, he was good at business. He's like, you know what? Let me pour all my energy into this because I can make the most money. I can donate, tons of money and make sadaqah jariyah.
Yeah, back to the example you talked about the car. Would there be any harm if you have extra money to add lights and make it very fancy, as long as you know that it will not have a direct effect on your deen or on any of your responsibilities in your dunya, such as taking care of your family, your parents?
Yeah, no. What's the harm, right? What's the harm? Like we find actually the Sahaba, like the stories of Sahaba that we read are from the time that when they didn't have a lot of money. But if you follow the stories of the Sahaba towards the end of their lives, Islam, they got a lot of wealth, right, from the conquests outside of Arabia. So they actually became quite rich, right? And they would have like a lot of wealth. And that didn't stop them from still being the Sahaba, still being the people who they were, right? So yes, as long as you know that you have enough to get to the destination and you're focused on getting to the destination in the car, it doesn't matter. You can make it as luxurious of a ride as you want, right? As long as it doesn't distract you from the akhirah.
That's fair.
Just one more question we have time for, and if no one's taking the opportunity, I will. Last question then for today. How do we know for ourselves what our baseline would be for Zuhd? So examples like the Sahaba, like Radhaman and Sheikh Abdurrahman and Auf, or even Uthman radiallahu anhu. These were big giant Sahabas from the best of Sahabas, super rich, but even then they died, recited Quran, died in that kind of thing. Versus another Sahaba like Abu Darda, also big giants of the Sahaba, but they didn't care at all about the dunya. They have like a piece of bread every day. How do we know which ones we can do without making sure we're going to extremes?
That's a good point. How do we know? Yeah, I would say like your body will start to tell you, or the life circumstances will start to tell you. Okay, so for example, you find Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he becomes the Amir al-Mu'mineen and he is given a certain salary, right? But we find that he actually, in the middle of the day, he would leave and he would go to the marketplace and starts buying and selling at a stall, right? Umar radiallahu anh, when he sees this, like, yeah, Amir al-Mu'mineen, you're the leader. What are you doing in the marketplace? Go back to being the king. And he's like, no, I have more expenses, I have more guests coming to my house, whatnot, and the salary that I have is not enough. So I have to work extra to make extra money, right? So his financial circumstances told him that he was not at a level of stability in that position, so he had to work more, right? So that could be a reason. Another reason could be the person might start falling into sins. Okay, so he might be trying to, for example, okay, I don't have enough money, or this and that, or I'm not gonna get married. I'm gonna give that into charity project or this or that. But then he starts falling into sins, right? And he's like, okay, you know what? Like my body's telling me something. Like there's a need that I'm not fulfilling, right? So therefore, like he has to come back. So they say your human psyche or your human makeup has different portions to it, right? There's your physical, your intellectual, your spiritual, your emotional, all these different layers to you. And sometimes when we want to focus really on one thing, like if you want to take our spirituality really far, right? We might just focus on like one thing and make the spirituality go really far. But as the saying goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? So the same thing applies, is that if you want our spirituality to improve really quickly, we might disregard everything else, stop eating, stop doing everything else, and just focus on spirituality. We might get the spiritual high really quickly, but we're not going to get far, because then we're going to burn out, right? So the way we can go far is by taking care of all different aspects of our human needs, right? So, for example, the hadith about like having intimacy with your spouse is a sadaqah. If you think about who is it a sadaqah for? Or like, have you thought about like, because your spouse might not be in the mood, so it might not be the sadaqah for them. So who is it a sadaqah for, right? So it could be the sadaqah for your nafs, right? Because your nafs has needs that you need to fulfill. Inna li jasadika alayka haqq. Your body has a right on you. So when you sleep, you're fulfilling that need. So that's a sadaqah for your body, right? Your intellect, when you learn something, when you ponder, that has a right on you, right? Your emotional needs, your social circles, hanging out, like why there's so much reward in maintaining the ties of kinship, being with your relatives. Like, does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala get anything out of it? No. It's because He wants to see us happy. He wants to see us with those needs fulfilled, right? So when all our needs are fulfilled in the different dimensions of the human being, then you become stable, right? And then you're able to go far. And so I think one of the signs would be in your life when you start noticing that you're not going far, like there's something missing, I think you haven't reached that baseline yet.
All right, Jazakallah khair, everybody. I think we got through everyone's questions. I do apologize if you had a question and we weren't able to get to it, inshallah. We are out of time though. So with that, I will end this off. Jazakallah khairan, Brother Ali, for coming and blessing us with this gathering, inshallah.
The pleasure was mine.
And may inshallah, inshallah we hope to see you again. But yeah, Jazakallah khairan. Any last words?
Jazakumullah khairan. And remember, this life is just a monopoly.
Jazakallah khair, Ustad. Thank you for coming.